Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you to all of the previous comments. I feel stunned almost by a sense of the history of this gathering, a Festival of Faiths, and I think it very helpful to place this within the context of that 1893. And then the digital neurons, and it sort of stops the mind. I had wanted to offer into this conversation experiential exercise, and I thought that might be different than what was, but it turns out that others have also done that. So I was going to offer that exercise. I'm going to give a little lead in to frame it as to why that we might do that particular exercise, what it might be about. And then after we've done the exercise, again, looking into our own experience of consciousness, then I want to say a little bit about some of the implications or suggestions that might come out of doing that exercise and doing similar contemplative inquiry, it's sometimes called, or first-person inquiry. So the topic for our panel, as given to us, was consciousness. And as we've seen so far, consciousness is, in a sense, the most obvious aspect of being human. Human consciousness is with us from the moment that we wake up, our waking consciousness. Even during sleep, we may remember a dream later. So dreaming consciousness, we've seen that consciousness is something that we can't get out of. And in a sense, some of this is reminding me of, there's an old cartoon or a joke about if you want to understand water and you ask a fish in the river about the water and they, water, what's that? We're swimming in consciousness, so it's elusive. So that phrase, the elusive obvious, it's something that's pervasive with us all the time. It's every day. It's not just special or extraordinary moments of consciousness or altered states of consciousness or higher consciousness or pure consciousness. It's every kind of consciousness from morning, noon, and night, from the first moment we wake up, even including into our sleep. So given that, it's elusive obvious. I'm reminded of a saying by one of the saints that, I think it's St. Augustine, if you ask me what time is, before you ask me, I know time. I know what time is. But once someone asks me, I don't know. And so when Melvin led us in that exercise at the very beginning of looking at, well, there's consciousness that's different than hearing the sound of someone coughing or seeing these lights or seeing whatever we're seeing. I don't know where to begin to answer that in some way. Like, what is that talking about? And yet it seems worthwhile to look and maybe wonder, which is what I'm left with at the end of the talk about a sense of wonder at consciousness, a sense of awe, as my students often would say, awesome. It's in a sense, the questions themselves. I think there's a saying by a German poet: as time goes on, maybe we'll come to love the questions. That very interest in understanding consciousness is itself, aside from whether we arrive at a fixed and somewhat dogmatic truth according to any particular tradition or form of scientific knowledge or so forth. I'm not sure that's actually what we're aiming for. The only other comment that, just to lead into this exercise, is there's a saying from an early Greek philosopher named Heraclitus. And Heraclitus said, we are estranged from that with which we're most familiar, which is a strange thing to say in a way. We've lost touch with something very familiar to us. How could that be possible? Familiar, the English word, comes from family, or is related to family. So family, the place where we're introduced to the human community, to being part of the human community, right? That happens in the family situation. And of course, there are sometimes tragic events and all kinds of things, but family is definitely that place of primary being welcomed, you could say, into being human. This is how we say goodnight. This is how we have a birthday party. So it's something very familiar to us, consciousness, our experience, and yet we've lost touch with it, Heraclitus is saying, a long, long time ago. So that seems true that yesterday there was mention in one of the panels of the speed of our culture is such that we often are missing the life that we're seeking out there to get to more of it and going right past it in some way. So we've lost touch with something very basic, perhaps with our own humanness in a certain way, right? We're certainly familiar with being human because we all are human. Yes? So how could we lose touch with our humanity, the feeling of being human, our human-heartedness? And yet that's possible. I think perhaps we could even say there's a risk of what happens as we lose touch. So in part, this exercise and similar exercises, experiential exercises, are about let's touch in with something very basic, very ordinary. We're not looking for anything ecstatic or superhuman or anything, just a basic aspect of being human. And I thought to look into our sense perceptions, our seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, just a little bit to do the exercise in terms of welcoming what are called our sense consciousnesses. So what we're going to do in the exercise could be framed as a way of knowing, a first-person inquiry, first-person knowing. The question will be, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? What do I think? That's first-person knowledge, right? Second person could be in a dialogue situation where someone shares, well, this is how the pandemic felt for me. This is how this month has felt for me. And we listen. And dialogue is based on a kind of second person. And then third person is she, he, they, it, that. That was that experience. That was called objective knowledge, right, at a certain point, and was definitely considered far more valuable to the exclusion in a certain setting, even I'm trained in part in religious studies, even in the study of religion, sort of. What you would think the first thing you might want to do is ask people, well, what's your experience of that ceremony? What's that like? What did that feel like? What happens in your feelings, in your emotional intelligence around that ritual? And yet, no, we're not interested in that. We want to get at what's actually going on. So in the exercise, I'm just going to guide you. I'll do a minute or so of, it's called the welcoming exercise. So for the next minute or so, and this is not meditating, it's not mindfulness, it's not prayer, it's not any of the various, there's all kinds of things that I'm sure all the people listening to this have encountered or heard of. We saw the Time magazine cover on the mindful revolution. This is not mindfulness. I'm not asking you to pay close and non-judgmental attention to your experience. I'm asking just to welcome, to begin with, your experience of your body, any sensations in your body as you're sitting here. Not a subtle body or inner body or anything, just ordinary body. My arm, my legs, my chest, right. And as we're doing this, we'll hear things like someone coughed. We'll see things. So just allow those, welcome those as well as we're going along. And then welcome anything emotionally. This would be important for emotional intelligence. What's our emotional weather this morning, this afternoon? How are we feeling as we are here? What's the inner weather like? Just welcome however it is. We're not trying to change it, make it better or improve it or get it to be 2.0 or 3.0 version. Just welcome however we feel, happy, sad. Just welcome our emotional life, our felt sense of feeling. Sound of coughing. Again, all of this continues as we're going along. This is not an exclusive focus or anything. Just welcoming. The body might continue welcoming things. Oh, my stomach growled or whatever it might be. And then welcome your thoughts as well. If you're thinking about the past, if you have a memory, if you're thinking about next week and you're anticipating, you have a project in the future, welcome that thought about the future. What will next week be like? What will this month be like? What will this country be like in next year? If you have thoughts, allow those thoughts and welcome those thoughts. We are not meditating, remember? We're not trying to come back to a present or anything. There's no focus with this. I'm just kind of giving you some suggestions as we go along. Body, emotion, thoughts. And then in the room where we are, what do you see? Welcome any visual form. What color, what shape? What do you see? What's the pattern? Just welcome your seeing. And if you hear anything, welcome whatever you hear. And just allow this sense of spaciousness and interest, inquisitiveness, curiosity. What is our experience? As it's happening, welcoming it. It's even before even asking what it is, which is an investigation or an inquiry. It's not so much trying to see its nature, what is the nature of consciousness, or all of these incredible questions. What is this? Just that we're alive as ordinary human beings with bodies, feelings, thoughts, cognitive processes, environments, sights, sounds. The arts have been an important part of this festival. All of the arts come out of sense perceptions, right? When we dance, when we make music, when we say poetry. So we're just, that human inheritance, it's just kind of valuing that or appreciating that. We're alive. We're not looking for anything special or blockbuster, just ordinary aliveness and welcoming that. Good. So what? What does this suggest, or what might we learn if we did this, again, let's say tomorrow or over time? Well, one thing that most of us notice who've done exercises like this, so-called spiritual exercises, contemplative exercises, which seem to be related to first-person inquiry, a term that Francisco Varela, I think, used fairly early on. We notice that the mind is almost always moving from this to that to that to this. Sometimes people say like a grasshopper. It hops, and then it hops, and that's even slow because this is like a grasshopper that's had too much coffee, right? And it sort of hops and hops and hops very quickly. And sometimes in the tradition that's talked about as a monkey mind, that our monkey mind has a mango, but it sees a coconut. And it's like, oh, over there, that would be better. And then once it has a coconut, it sees banana. So we notice that this is the mind of, I guess we would call it distraction. And there are studies about what's going on with technology, digital technology in the digital world in terms of our attention, consciousness, and our being human. So leaving that aside as a small question for the moment, if we notice this movement of mind, or what's called distraction, we now know that available to us are many, many ways of cultivating a stability of mind, a steadiness of mind. The shamatha project that was mentioned, this word shamatha refers to peacefully staying, that we can actually stay with our experience moment to moment, and that can be cultivated. A person can do that. Any of us could do that. And it turns out that in all our relationships, that's valuable. It's always a telltale if I have to ask, can you say that again, what you were telling me, this important thing that because I was thinking about what happened yesterday or tomorrow, I didn't actually hear what you said? So that kind of a presence in a social, relational way with each other could be very valuable, yeah? Then the other quality that we may notice as we just pause and welcome is that there's a habitual default setting that sort of comes back to me. And me, how's me? A kind of anxiety about me and how me is doing. And there's a way in which that's a kind of contraction and feels constricted, almost slightly like being in a cocoon. There's one image for it. And so noticing that's also one of our mental habits, you could say. It's something that our consciousness does. It kind of contracts. Noticing that, it turns out that, thinking of the past and those folks gathered in 1893, human beings have passed on to us many ways of cultivating empathy and compassion, loving kindness and love. So there are ways of working with that contraction, that kind of fearful, to ease it somewhat and expand into a larger sense of empathy and compassionate action that could come out of that sense of feeling with and feeling others. So both of those are suggested just by the little exercise that we did for a few minutes there. So our topic, Melvin has several times said this, is not just theoretical or philosophical or metaphysical or something abstract and whatever. This topic of consciousness actually has to do with what would be a good life, what is a good neighborhood, good community, good society, good bioregion. How would we care for the region that we live in and nature and other life forms? So consciousness is not just out there, that abstract subject. It turns out to have to do with our human life. Thank you.